The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, good morning and welcome to this Routledge Enterprise Learning webinar. Our topic today is Organizational Transformation Starts with Leadership Agility, and our speaker is Dr. Ron Meyer. Before we get started, I just want to check the technology. On the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a control panel. On that control panel, there should be a hand icon. If you can hear me speaking now, can you please click that hand icon to raise your hand? Please click the hand icon to raise your hand if you can hear us. Okay, I think that's working. Also on that control panel, you can see the question option, and you can add questions to ask our panelist at any point through the session, and I'll be putting those questions at appropriate points to him. Before we get with the presentation, I'm going to hand over to my colleague from Routledge Enterprise Learning, Kaustubha, who will introduce the program to you.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone, for joining this webinar today. I mean, it's a Saturday early morning for you all, and I'm sure that this program will definitely add value and I mean, whatever you're expecting out of this program. So just to give you a brief introduction about myself. Hi, everyone. This is Kaustubha. I lead the Enterprise Learning division at Routledge Enterprise Learning. I'm also joined by Naveen Rao, who is the Director of Products and Innovation at Taylor & Francis. A brief introduction on the attendees who we have today for the webinar. So it's a mixed bag that we have for today. We have the senior business management. It could be CXOs, say VPs, directors who are attending from a business perspective for their own teams. We have the learning and development peers over here, the CLOs, learning and development heads, managers. And we also have a handful of learners who are actually looking at this program and looking at getting enrolled for this program if this is what they're expecting for themselves. So this is a very brief about the audience that we have for today's meeting. I would now like to introduce Ron Meyer, who is our presenter for today. And Ron, I mean, I would want you to take over from now and introduce yourself to the audience. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, good morning to all of you. It is indeed early on a Saturday morning. Thank you for taking the time to join. To be absolutely honest, it's 8 o'clock in the morning where I am, and I don't know how you feel on Saturday mornings most of the time. I've had my third cup of coffee, so I hope I'm awake enough, but it has been a long week, so I can sympathize with the fact that you're probably also still in a waking up mode and taking it easy mode. So I'll try to make it as relaxed, but probably hopefully also as interesting as possible. Since I'm you could say the lead faculty member during the entire Leadership Agility program, it is useful just to get to know each other a little bit. I won't dwell too long, and then launch into a short introduction of the approach that we're going to be taking to leadership. In about 20 minutes, I'd probably just take a short break for some Q&A. If in the meantime, while I'm presenting, you do have questions, feel free to use the question function to already pose those. But we'll just take a short Q&A break. And then in the second half of this hour, I'll be discussing how we actually structured the program. And then again, at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. So maybe you've had some time now to get used to my voice, and you'll notice that I do have a bit of a curious accent. This is what happens if you take a Canadian guy and send them to Europe and let them live there for 35 years. So if you see my screen that I'm sharing with you, you'll see that I'm a professor of strategic leadership at the Tilburg University in the Netherlands. I'm actually also a professor of strategic leadership in Antwerp in Belgium. And I focus there very much on the link between leadership and how you mobilize people in organizations, particularly how you get them to develop, but also to implement strategies. So that's my focus area within the leadership field. But I actually only do that 2 days a week, because the other 3 days a week, I work for the Center for Strategy and Leadership. And that's an organization that works with companies in practice, mostly with management teams, to develop their strategy, to develop their leadership teams, and to develop their individual leadership themselves. I always feel that you should be connected to theory, but you also have to be connected to practice. Yeah, just a little bit more about myself. I just mentioned earlier that I'm originally from Canada, actually from Alberta, Canada, close to the Rocky Mountains. But I'm curious, currently living in the opposite type of place, which is a very, very flat country, Holland, in the city of Rotterdam. So I've gone from the countryside in the mountains to a flat international city. But it's a fun place to live because it's very, very international, 180 nationalities, the biggest harbor in Europe. So a very, very international place. So I love to take an international view on leadership. You'll see that I'm very proud to be Johanna's husband. I don't know why she stays with me, but she still does. Maybe it's because we have 5 kids, so she's more or less tied to me. Again, there was no strategy there, but things happen, and before you know it, you have a lot of them. Besides doing all of this type of work, I love to travel and to see the world, and I love hiking. There you see a picture of me with my elder son and 2 of my friends in Nepal last year. We had a hike to the base camp of Mount Everest. I didn't go up the mountain. I thought base camp was far enough. And yes, the very practical reason why I've gotten involved in this entire program is because I love to write books, but I also love to share those books with others. And one of the books that I wrote a couple of years ago was on leadership agility, and that's the very practical reason why we're now sitting together. Now that you know a little bit about me, I'm very curious to learn a little bit more about you. So before I go on to describe to you our approach to leadership, I'd like to just ask you a few questions to know my audience. I personally, and you'll get to know that in a moment, think that leadership is about connecting with others and trying to influence others. That means I'd like to connect to you and to try to find out who you are. So we could go to the first poll question.
Hi, Ron, and sorry to interrupt. I'm going to suggest a slight change of plan. A few people tuned into the webinar, but I think because it's Saturday morning, they're slow to join us. So these may not make so much sense. So perhaps we go on to the presentation now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. So, well, in that case, let me carry on then with the presentation that I had prepared. So what I'd like to do is to share with you the approach to leadership which we're taking, because I think that one of the key reasons why you've tuned in is to understand what is the unique approach that we take. And there I think it's very important to clearly define our terms. So what do we mean by leadership? The term leadership is used quite loosely. I've noticed that quite a few organizations now publish their annual reports, and they'll talk about the leadership team. And to me, that's a misuse of the word leadership, because they actually mean the management team. So let's clarify what we mean by leadership. My simple definition, by the way, would be, you know that you're a leader if other people are following. And that's a very simple definition, but it clearly encapsulates what we should mean by leadership, that it is about getting other people to come along on a voyage. Leadership is about enticing other people and engaging other people to want to come along. Now, if you contrast that with manager, it means that a manager is, well, I always ask people, so how do you notice whether someone is a manager? Well, the easiest way is to actually ask them for their business card and to say, well, let me see your business. Sales manager. Yeah, that means you're a manager. Operations manager. Okay. Team manager. So management is all about having a job with rights and responsibilities. You could say it's a position in the organization. I think this is very important. The people that would be attending this program, they probably would be managers at some level, but the fact that you've been appointed to be a manager doesn't necessarily make you a leader. So leadership, as I define it, that's you play a role with or without a formal position. So leading is what you do. It's not the chair that you're sitting in. So if you take that definition and you run with it, how do you become a manager? Well, you're appointed usually by someone in a higher management position. But how do you become a leader? That's an entirely different process. You actually need to earn to become a leader. So you need to step up and others need to accept you and they have to want to follow your lead. So this is why it's very important to work on your leadership. Appointments are done quite quickly. So leadership is something that takes a while to develop because you need to connect with people and they have to decide that they're actually going to buy into you, that they're actually going to come along for the voyage. So if you then translate that into what are the means that you have at your disposal, you see that as a manager, you're given formal powers. You can assign work, you can spend money, you can give rewards, and you can punish. But as a leader, actually the most important thing, you might also have formal powers, but actually the most important thing you have at your disposal are informal authority. If you've built up trust, if people think that you're able, if you're inspiring, if you're persuasive, there's many ways in which you could actually influence the other. And if you can influence the other to come along, so that's actually going to be the power that you have. And that's mostly not in the chair that you're sitting in, that's really vested in you as a person, but you need to build it up. So if we conclude, what is your approach? If you're a manager, well, you can use your formal power to get people to comply. You have carrots and sticks, you might decide to use them, but we'll be talking about leadership as trying to get people's commitment. You want to engage them, and it is about winning hearts and minds. So that doesn't mean that you always have to be nice, but it always has to be felt as being legitimate by the other because you do want to get them to come on board. They need to be committed. It's not about, okay, I'll do it because otherwise you'll hit me over the head. So how do people respond to compliance? Well, if you force them to comply, they're going to think of, what's in it for me? Should I listen? And then they'll start thinking, well, I'll listen as long as you're pressuring me, but as soon as you're gone, they won't be motivated anymore. But you're trying to create a win-win relationship in which you get the other to also care about achieving a common goal. So it's really about building that relationship between you by which the other is invested also with their heart and with their mind. So what's the best result you're going to get as a manager? Well, if you start managing people, then you might get acceptable performance. They're going to toe the line. But of course, as leaders, we want to get excellent performance because we want to trigger that intrinsic motivation. So my golden rule of thumb is manage things, but lead people. Manage your money, manage your buildings, manage your processes, because all of those things don't necessarily care, and you don't have to get their will, so trigger their will. But when it comes to people, you do really want to tap into that will. So, and if they want to, that's how you're going to really get them engaged. So I hope this is a definition that appeals to you, because once we start focusing on this way of leading, again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're always nice, but it is really about how am I going to connect with that person and I always challenge people on my programs that I know that you have formal power, but that's kind of the fallback option. So try to do it with your personality. So try to do it with you as a human. So that's how you're going to get the best long-term results. And this is challenging to a lot of people, particularly when they get into their first management job or the second management job, where they go, now I have the position, now I can finally play the boss. And playing the boss is generally the worst way to actually motivate other people. So if you have any questions, remember, go ahead and use and post them. So if we use this definition of leadership, it also means that leadership is not only simply about leading down. I say to a lot of my students and the managers and the senior managers that I work with, actually leading down is probably the easiest, because people are looking to you and they're actually thinking, please don't manage me, try to lead me. So they're already expecting you or hoping that you're going to lead, that you're going to appeal to them, that you're going to try to engage them. So if you do, you already have the benefit of the doubt. And if you do, they'll actually generally be quite happy about that. So we'll talk about leading down, but we'll also talk about leading across. How do you connect with your peers? How do you get other people in the management team or in your teams that you're working in? How do you get them to come along on the voyage? Ooh, that's generally a little bit more difficult. And very often you don't have any formal power. All you have is your influence. Or how about leading out to network partners, to suppliers, so to distributors, to anybody else that you need to, again, get on board? And you're probably already guessing, leading also goes up. So leading your boss, you might not think about that quite quickly, but it is very important to think about, but my boss doesn't have all of the answers either. So how can I get my boss to come along in a certain direction without triggering all types of ego issues, without being too arrogant, without seeming, say, insubordinate, but I'd still like to get my boss to come along in a certain direction. So we'll be talking about Leadership 360. So it is really about thinking about all of the various stakeholders that you would like to influence and that you would like to bring along on the voyage. So when we talk about leadership development, so we also, with this type of view of leadership, we'll talk about leadership development in a moment, but I just want to check in with you and see if you have any questions about how we think about leadership at this moment. So Mark,
yes,
have we got any questions?
Yes, as Ron says, do send your questions in. You can use the control panel to do that. Yes, one question for you, Ron. Is leadership born? Are leaders born or are they made? Is it more natural for some people to be leaders than others?
I think it's a very, very good question. And I think a lot of people get mixed up because they'll look at heroic leaders and they'll very, very famous leaders, and they'll see so much talent and they think, wow, see, true leadership, that must be something that you're born with. But I think that we fool ourselves in that way. If you look at very, very famous cricket players, you say, well, if you get to the top of the league, you're probably very talented, you're born with certain talents. And that's probably true. Although don't forget, even the most talented person, if they don't work on developing that talent, they're never going to get to the top. But I would argue that all of us could learn to play cricket. It's not something that you need to be supernatural for. We might not all get to the very top, but we can probably learn to play a pretty decent game. And it's the same thing with leadership. We don't have to become Mahatma Gandhi. We just need to be good enough leaders to be successful in our organizations. And that level of leadership is something that can be earned. And particularly because there's not just one way of being a leader. So when it comes to developing your influence, it is really about thinking about what are some of my strengths? What are the things that I'm good at? How could I actually try to engage those people? So it is about finding the style that suits with you. But of course, we'll talk about it in a moment. It's also about finding styles that suit with the other. But all of us can actually learn to be pretty good leaders. but we do need to work at it. Any other questions, Mark?
One more, and this is quite an interesting one. How important is image management to be an effective leader?
Ooh, that is very important. You have to realize that as we're discussing leadership now, if it's about informal power, it does mean that it's actually all depending on whether others want to trust you, if they want to follow you, if they think that if they come along on the voyage, it'll be worth their while. So it is very much about how others perceive you. I often say it's just like a car. If you can have a fantastic car, but the product will never sell itself. Most people can't really entirely judge the quality of a car. So the brand that you put on the car is very important. The brand has to reflect how good the car is, but the brand actually is a promise to others about, if you buy me, say you're going to get something really good. So you need to think about your own branding as a leader as well. If people see that brand and they trust that brand, if the promise is great, so they're going to come on board. Then they're going to find out that you're actually a good leader, and then they'll start building up even more trust. So yes, we need to really think not only about developing our skills, but also developing how others perceive us. Well, keep those questions coming. But in the meantime, I think it's a good idea to now move from our discussion about what leadership is to how we actually should go about developing leaders. So if we look at leadership development, I thought I would take a bit of an Indian example. So here, we tend to think about leaders as these strong people, these tigers, these people who are big, is almost bigger than life, who have quite a bit of a bite. But I would argue, think about that again. How many tigers are still out there? Maybe it's much better to use a different metaphor. Maybe leaders should learn more from mice and not from tigers. Because why are there so much mice and why are there so few tigers? Because in survival of the fittest, it doesn't matter whether you're strong, it matters whether you're agile. And a mouse is extremely agile. So what do we mean by being agile? It means that you do what's necessary under the conditions you find yourself to be successful. So you sense what's required and you adapt yourself to that situation. Well, as we all know, there's mice all across the world because they don't need to be strong to be successful. They'll eat whatever is necessary. They'll adapt themselves to whatever is necessary. So I think that we should be inspired more by the humble mouse. So when we speak of agility, we say it's not about impressing ourselves upon the other. That's a very old-fashioned way of thinking about leadership. If I just pump myself up and force myself on the other, then they'll submit and then they'll follow my lead. But I like to say that leadership is about thinking about the follower, not thinking about the leader. It starts with realizing, how does the person that I'm trying to win the heart of, I'm trying to win the mind of, what is in their heart and what's on their minds? And how can I connect to that? I need to adapt myself to my audience, and I need to try to get my audience to come along. And that means that it requires a lot of adaptability on my side. So we define agility as you need to sense what the situation and the person requires. So it is very much about sensing the environment. It's then about having a broad repertoire of behaviors, because the more behaviors you have, the more you'll be able to find the right behavior to suit those circumstances. And where you don't have the necessary repertoire yet, broaden your repertoire. Make sure that you're not a one-trick pony or a one-trick tiger, but that you're able to do different things under different circumstances. So the entire approach that we have to leadership development is actually to broaden your repertoire. you probably already have styles of leadership. You already have ways in which you like to approach other people, but we don't want to build on those strengths. We actually want to broaden your repertoire so that you actually are able to approach different people under different circumstances in different ways. We don't want you to get stuck in only one best way. So the entire program is about looking at what are these different styles, and when is it appropriate, and when does it connect with some people. So you might recognize, for those who have done leadership courses before, this is a little bit like situational leadership. But in situational leadership, they make it a little bit simplistic. There's 4 situations. So there's 4 ways in which you can lead. But I think all of us will recognize immediately the world is much more complex than only 4 situations. There's actually thousands. There is so many different types of situations that if you think that mechanistically, and oh, wait a second, this is situation 2, now I need to do this. You need to think, I have a human across from me. What would I require to now connect? And this human is in this team and is in this company, in this industry, and these are the circumstances, all of these variables, and now I need to connect. What do I have in my backpack that I can now pull out, which is going to make that connection? So we are going to be very situationally aware. We are going to be very much person aware, but we don't have a standard solution. We're going to challenge people to think about what are the different ways that I can approach, and do I have the mental flexibility to actually think, oh, now I can use this tool. So that would make somebody very agile. Now, some people in the past have said, well, that sounds very advanced. Maybe we should only do that with people who are much more experienced. But actually, I believe that even people who are starting to lead, we don't want to first say, leadership is simple, do these 4 things. And then after 5 or 10 years say, by the way, forget that. That was much too simple. Now you need to learn that there's actually more styles. I would say let's go directly to a true understanding of what leadership is about and try to be agile from the very beginning. Maybe you'll also recognize that this need for agility is only getting stronger because we're getting more and more diversity in our teams, not only more gender diversity, we're getting people from different nationalities, but more and more people are taking their own personality to work. Maybe 30 years ago, you had to be corporate man, literally corporate man, and do what everyone else was doing. But more and more organizations are allowing people to be themselves. But that means if you want to lead these people being themselves, you're going to have to deal with the diversity of the humans around you. So, what does this mean? So I had some room here for some check-in questions. Hopefully that's not you. So if we look at what we're going to focus on, in this program, we want to actually look at 5 different areas. We call them 5 different domains of leadership. So first, we would like to look at how you actually connect with other individuals. And this level of connecting with the individual, we call it interpersonal leadership. And I think that many of you will recognize this. As a leader, you need to coach. It is really about connecting with the other individual and how I can get that other individual to perform as best as possible. But we want to take people beyond only that one-on-one relationship. We want to get them to think about, I say here, it's not about being the boss. But we want people also to think about, how do I connect with an entire team, or with an entire unit, or maybe it's even the entire organization. And we call that organizational leadership. And there, your role as leader is that of the organizer. How do I get individuals organized for joint action? How do we get them to gel as a team? How do we make decisions as a team? It's not about being the hero, but it is about being effective as an organizer. It isn't only the individual that you need to motivate. Now, very often, even if you're a team lead for that team, you also need to develop a direction. You need to develop a strategy. So you might not be involved in corporate strategy, but you're involved in strategy at your own level. So that's also another challenge. And there you're engaged in strategic leadership. I need to set a direction. I need to get my team moving in that direction. I don't necessarily need to be a prophet who has all of the answers. Follow me, I know where the promised land is. But I do need to get my team engaged in thinking about where we want to head and what we want to achieve. So we'll be talking about each individual's role as a strategic leader as well. Now, more and more, we get younger people who want to have an answer to the question, why? Why do we exist as an organization? So basically, we also need to deal with some people's questions, but what's our mission? And there we call that your role as sense maker. So what mission gives meaning to people's work? You don't need to be the guru, so has all of the answers to the issues of life, but people are going to ask you as a leader, how are we making a difference? So why should I care? And as a leader, you should have an answer to that. And there's a fifth I mentioned, and you'll see that on the screen, there's no room at the bottom, so we'll go to the top. It's actually you as a leader and being a role model. So even before you interact with others, people are going to be looking to you and going to see how you behave, and that itself is already going to be inspiring. So you don't need to be an idol that everyone looks up to, but you do want to be a role model that people are going to want to emulate, or at least they're going to say, hey, this person is walking the talk, and that's inspiring me to do that as well. So these are the 5 dimensions of leadership that we're going to be looking at, and these are then also the 5 dimensions along which we also have leadership styles. So just if you don't have to memorize these 5, but you'll see that these 5 actually come back, say here, as the 5 leadership domains. And now you'll start seeing how we've structured the program. So we've structured it along these 5. And for each of the domains, there are questions that you need to deal with as a leader. And we call those your leadership tasks. And so for instance, at the interpersonal level, if I'm dealing with the other individual, I would like to steer that person. I want to get them directed to a certain heading. So the question is, how do I steer them? And then there's what we call a leadership paradox. There's actually very often opposite ways of doing so. In this case, the paradox is that I'd like them to carry out certain types of activities, so I can focus on steering on the basis of the activities. These are the activities you should carry out. But I can also steer on the basis of setting certain types of conditions. I'll create the circumstances, and then they can figure out for themselves what type of activities are necessary. So the question is, which of these 2 should I actually focus on? Actually, these 2 gives you 2 opposite types of leadership styles. If you focus on the activities, making sure that people carry out the activities that you've defined, you have a supervisory leadership style. But if you focus on creating only the right conditions, and if these conditions are good enough to nudge people in a certain direction, you can say, I don't need to tell people what to do. I'll just let them loose, and I'll let the circumstances I've created lead them in the right direction. And we call that a facilitative leadership style. And of course, these are the black and white. You could call them the 2 opposite ends of a continuum. And then the question as a leader is, should I be focusing on one or the other, given the audience that I'm trying to steer? So we're really thinking through that there's not one best way. We shouldn't treat everybody in the same way. I need to be able to play around with what's going to be useful, given the person that I have in front of me and the situation that they're in. Do you see this logic? So if we look at a second type of interpersonal leadership task, say, I also need to give each individual some feedback, because without this feedback, I'm not going to be able to steer. But then again, if I start thinking about feedback, there's 2 opposite ways of giving feedback, depending on whether I want to focus on challenging people and say, wait a second, you can do better. This isn't good enough. You need to jump higher. Then I'm going to challenge them. But I can also show them appreciation and say, hey, this is already great. This is something you're doing particularly well. Build on this. So do I want to challenge, or do I want to appreciate? Well, that means, of course, that we can also switch between leadership styles. I use a demanding leadership style, I'm going to focus on challenging them, jump higher. And if I use an encouraging leadership style, I can say, hey, you're doing a great job, build on that. So you see that these leadership styles that we're going to be introducing are really to stretch people's understanding of, wait a second, there's a lot of different ways of doing things well. And do I recognize which style I feel most comfortable using? I use the metaphor of football, where if you're kicking a ball, you can be right-legged or you can be left-legged. So depending on, you're always going to have a favorite leg. But if you really want to be a good football player, you should be able to kick the ball with both. Because you can't always shape the circumstances. Sometimes the ball is going to fall in front of your least favorite leg, and you want to be able to kick it. So it's really about understanding which of these styles comes more naturally to you, the one that you feel more comfortable with. We call that your default style. That's the one that you go to because it feels comfortable. That means that you can still get better at that style, but if you want to broaden your repertoire, you need to make sure that the other style also is available to you. So not only get better with the leg that is already good, but make sure that the other leg is also capable and able to kick the ball. It means that you really should be working on both. But you need to recognize that the style that you're good at, that sometimes you overuse that style because people do overuse their strengths. So you might have heard that some programs will say, oh, build on your strengths, get better at your strengths. We say, sure, get better at your strengths. But you can get locked up in that strength and keep on using that strength even when it's not appropriate. So it's great to build on your strengths if you only need to use one thing. If you want to become a concert pianist, don't practice your saxophone, don't practice playing a trumpet, only focus on playing a piano. But that's because you're a specialist. But as a leader, you can't be a specialist. You have to be all around because you're dealing with all of these different people and all of these different circumstances. If you need to be an all-arounder, you're going to have to practice all of these skills. Well, I won't go through all of the details, but you see the buildup of the program. And by the way, these are the various weeks. So in week 3, we would be looking at steering. In week 4, we go to feedback. And each week, we look at the task, we look at the paradox, and then we look at the opposite styles. And in that way, and then we ask people, practice these, bring these into work, and start using them. The only way you're going to really master these styles is to practice them. So just taking you quickly through the other topics that we would be discussing. When it comes to organizational leadership, we will be talking about what we call composition. How do you put together a team? Do you want a very tightly knit team, or do you want to build coalitions? Well, sometimes you need to build that tight team, and sometimes you need to build coalitions. So sometimes you can create unity, and sometimes you're going to have to deal with diversity. So there, the opposite styles are the integrative leadership style and the federative style. When it comes to decision making in the team, you want to focus between or balance between setting the direction, but also making sure that people participate and they take ownership. So how do you want to balance those? If you go over to the side of direction, you make the decisions, then you're autocratic. By the way, that's not bad, it's not old-fashioned. Sometimes you need to take the responsibility of making the decision. But there's going to be other circumstances in which you overdo that style, and then autocratic becomes very negative. Then you start becoming the dictator. So you need to, how much of democracy, and democracy doesn't mean we're going to vote, but it does mean that you want to get people involved, you want to hear their voices, you want to let them take responsibility as well. So this is what we'll be discussing when we talk about decision making. Then when it comes to strategic leadership, it's about what types of goals am I going to set? Am I going to set more far away goals, goals which are maybe a little bit more idealistic? I have a dream. Or do you want to set goals which are far more realistic? And balancing between the ideal and the real, we can go to the visionary style. So let's head over in that direction. I don't know exactly how. Or being more pragmatic. This is what we're going to do next week. Again, you probably already understand we need to balance between those two. And we also need to set priorities. What type of priorities am I going to set? Am I going to prioritize exploitation, running the existing business, making sure that we get our work done on a day-to-day basis? Or do I need to focus renewing and finding new things? So exploration, trying to find new horizons. So do I manage the existing or create the new? Well, if I want to focus on running the existing, I'm more of an executive leader. If I'm focusing on finding new horizons, I'm more the entrepreneurial leader. And maybe not in every position that I'm in, do I need both? But I do need to think about what situation I'm in, how much renewal do we need, and what type of style should I require. We go to mission. It is going to be about setting the purpose and clarifying the purpose to people, or balancing between wealth and health. We need to make money. We need to be an economically sound organization. So we need to focus on creating value for our customers, value for our shareholders, value for ourselves. But at the same time, we need to think about the organizational health, the health of ourselves, the health of our team, the health of the organization, and the ecological health, the societal health. So here we're thinking about, when do I focus on values, of being value driven? And when do I focus on being virtue driven? But we also need to think about whose interests are we serving, not only what interest, but whose interest. Should I say to people, look, I have a dream, follow me, this is what I would like to achieve? Then it's self-actualization, then it's about what I would like to achieve. Or is your role that of service? Say, it's not about me, it is really about doing what we need as a team. If I'm focusing on achieving my goals, I'm the entrepreneur, I'm the person running this, come along with me, then I'm using a sovereign style. If it's all about here, I'm here to serve you, so then it's the servant leadership style. And then the last, if you think about how you on a day-to-day basis deal with being a leader, people are going to look to you about the way that you go about dealing with problems. They're going to look at, are you focused more on, do you think first and then act? Or you act first and then think? And we call this the reflective style, in which you think first, and then only once you've thought things through do you move into action. Are you more of a proactive type of leader who let's act and then think and act and think and act as we're going along? And the last one we're going to be looking at, and by now we're already is in week 11. So we'll look at how you link up with the outside world. We call that attunement. How do you make sure that you actually connect with the outside world? And the question is, in trying to link with other people, do you stay very close to yourself? You're going to have to take me the way I am, because I want to be authentic, I want to be real, I want to be genuine. But at the same time, if I want to build a relationship with you, I need to connect with you, and I need to adjust myself to what you need. So I need to also adjust at the same time. So do I stay close to me, or do I come close to you? And there's also some balancing. Sometimes I'll say, no, I'm going to stay very close to me. I'm going to be very consistent. You know exactly what you get because I'm the same most of the time. And there's other moments in which I'm going to say, look, I'm just going to have to be what's required under these circumstances. I need to be very responsive. So again, we're going to have to ask ourselves the question, so what style is most appropriate? Well, let me just check in again before I go any further. Mark, how are we doing question-wise?
Yes, I do have an interesting question for you here about ethics. And the question is whether being an agile leader means that you have to compromise on ethics. And if that's not the case, then how can agile leadership help you to deal with ethical situations? Yes.
Well, very interesting question. We will be picking that up in the later part of the program. So when it comes to adapting yourself to the situation, one of the pitfalls of being very adjustment oriented is that you start thinking, well, that's the way things go around here. I'm just going to have to adapt myself to the circumstances. and go along with the values which are dominant here. But before you know it, that means that you're going to go over certain boundaries that are actually very close to you. So then you've lost yourself, and by the way, that'll come back to haunt you. And say, that wasn't me doing that. So this is really about balancing between how much do I stay close to who I am and what I believe, and to what extent do I need to adapt myself. So for those of you who have done a lot of traveling, you'll recognize this, that if you come to certain countries where there's other values and other ethics, you have to ask yourself, to what extent do I need to go along with the local culture, even though it's much more different than I would feel, or do I stay true to myself? And I say, no, I might now be the person from abroad, so it's imposing my ethics, but I need to remain true to myself. So this is a balancing act, so that every leader, we can't walk away from it. So, but it is good to raise it and to be aware of how far do I want to go. It's not an ethics course, but you're absolutely right that if you would go too far in being agile, so this ethics, I don't need that. I'm going to be very, very adaptive. So, and you could be very successful in the mafia, but you probably would come to regret it at some moment. Any other questions, Mark?
Thank you. Yes, a question. The situation is that somebody wants to be a leader, an agile leader, and yet they're not necessarily being given the opportunity to do that by their superiors. How can somebody prove their worth and prove their ability as a leader in order to get that responsibility?
Yeah. Well, as I said at the very outset, you need to earn your leadership. And this can be very challenging because you can't demand your leadership. You're going to have to earn it. And that means that you need to build up your influence. Now, if you have a boss who says, I don't believe in you yet, then they're going to not give you very much room to maneuver. And then you're going to have to ask yourself the question, how am I going to earn that trust? How am I going to earn that confidence? So I'm going to have to start leading up. So it is again around touching hearts and minds. Why is it that my boss doesn't trust me? Why doesn't he or she have confidence in me? How am I going to connect? What do I need to do to get my boss to come along on the journey that I think should be undertaken? So it is really about not treating your boss like your boss, but treating your boss like a human. There might be worries. There might be things that person finds important. They might have a certain perception, so it might even be a bias about you. You're going to have to work about building that confidence. Remember, as we said before, it's all perception. You need to connect. Don't outsource the problem. Wow, it's all my boss's fault. No, it's within. Take it within yourself. What could I do to make that connection? Now, having said that, there's always going to be people that you're going to fail at connecting with. And that's not only with your boss, there's going to be some peers. There might have been people on your team that even though you try, somehow or another, they're resistant, or there's not a match, or you can't find your way into their hearts. So sometimes you're just going to have to give up. I mean, so I can tell you there's the solution to everything, but let's also be very honest, face the brutal facts. There are going to also be people where you cannot connect and say, well, I'm not the right person under these circumstances. And if it's your boss, that might mean that it's time to move on and find a different boss. If it's somebody in your team that you can't connect with, it might not be your fault or their fault, but there's not a connection, then maybe that person should go to another team, or I should go to another team. So where you can shape your environment into people that you can actually lead. Sometimes you can shape your own team. So try to shape that team with people that actually are easy for you to connect with.
Great, thank you.
Mark, I see we're getting so close to the end, but maybe there are some last questions.
We do have some last questions, and the next one is actually the flip side of the last one. So, a question from the boss's point of view: how do you cultivate agile leaders in my organization?
Yeah, well, that's a very, very good one. How can you actually help people to learn? Well, the general rule of thumb is people will learn best if they feel safe. So how can you as a boss create the safety that people are going to feel that they can learn? Because learning is always going to be uncomfortable in the beginning. You're going to make mistakes. You're not going to be good at it yet. Just think about if you want to learn to speak a foreign language. When I met my wife, who was Austrian, I suddenly had to learn to speak German. Now, if you're an adult man and suddenly you need to speak a tongue that you've never spoken before, in the beginning you feel really stupid, and you don't dare to speak that language because you're afraid of looking stupid. But you have to go out and do it anyway, because the only way you're going to learn to speak that other language is by trying, failing and failing and failing, until eventually you get better at it and get better at it. And after a while, people say, wow, you're almost native. Now, that same journey you're going to have to go through to develop your leadership skills. So you hope that the person who's doing the learning is courageous enough that they dare to try and to practice and to fail and to practice. But it means that you as their boss, but hopefully also their leader, can help to create an environment in which that's okay. That doesn't mean that you find everything, say, oh, that's great, no problem. You can actually also give somebody some challenging feedback. Remember, we have these two different types of feedback. You can use your encouraging feedback to say, that's great. That you did particularly well. Keep on doing that. Keep on practicing. I'm behind you. But you can also use some challenging feedback and say, that was a mistake. That you need to really work on. This is something that you can really improve. So you can challenge and appreciate, but it always needs to feel for the other person that this is feedback intended for them to grow. And if you can create that type of an environment that people feel that there is that, you're giving them that room to grow and that you're well intended towards them, then they're going to dare to take that risk. Remember, learning is risky. So how can you help them in that? Any other questions?
Thank you. We've got time for one last question, and this is about leading down. In fact, the questioner asks for you to elaborate leading down in detail. We probably don't have time for that, but do you have one or two top tips about what that means in practice?
Well, so what I just quickly call leading down is somebody is hierarchy on me, and my to be have power to tell that person what to do. Don't. If you use your formal power corrupts, because it looks quite, I'll just tell that person what to do. But once you define the relationship as I'm going to tell you what to do, the other is going to feel it. Oh, so that's the way that you want to deal with me. You want to just tell me what to do. Okay, well, then tell me what to do. So when you're leading down, you're in the lead determining the relationship. And you can make the relationship one in which you want to lead that person. So you're going to facilitate them, you're going to supervise them, but you're there to make a connection with them. And even when you're supervising and you're saying, these are the things that I think that we should be doing, so you're still trying to get them on board. You're still trying to be legitimate. You're still trying to make sure that they want to. That's always tricky. I don't know whether you have you ever gone horse riding, or if you've worked with or elephant riding, or any other type of animal in which you can tell an animal what to do. So you can tell a donkey what to do, So, but usually, if you try to break their will, it takes you a long time. And if you break their will, they'll slog. I'm using the example of horse riding because coming from Canada, I used to be a cowboy during high school. The thing you needed to do is you needed to connect with the horse. The horse had to trust me. You didn't tell the horse what to do, but then he'll do so just to get his carrot and because he fears my stick. But if the horse really wants to, now he's doing it for you. Now he's going to jump. Now he's going to go into the water. Horses hate the water, but because he wants to do it for me and he trusts me, he is going to go into the water. So to summarize again, it is all about hearts and minds. And if you need, I get a carrot and a stick, I lay it away and say, and that's for the last resort. But the carrot and stick, it's so easy. Don't use it. How am I going to win hearts and minds? That would be the core of my advice. And in the program, we go about talking about, so how could you make that practical?
Great, thank you very much. Well, that brings us more or less to the end of our webinar today. Ron, I would like to thank you on behalf of all of us who've been listening in to that presentation, which managed to be both inspiring and practical. So thank you very much. On behalf of Routledge Enterprise Learning, I'd also like to thank everybody who's tuned in today. Thank you for some really interesting questions. Thank you for following along. And we will be in touch to tell you more about the programme and also to ask for your feedback as well. We'd be really interested to hear your thoughts and the things that you would like to find out more about and how we can support your organisation to being one which makes the most of effective leadership. So thank you very much to everyone who's been involved this morning. Goodbye.
Thank you.